What's happening, hobby people? My name is Jacob from the Dry Paint Pot, and I've had a lot of you tell me how much you loved my Necron commission. So this week, I'm going to teach you all of my tips and tricks and show you how to paint a Necron Warrior, so stick around. Now, before we get things rolling today, I just want to share a few things with you. First things first, the Dry Paint Pot stickers are now on sale. We have the Pothead sticker, the classic Dry Paint Pot sticker, and Edge Highlighting Sucks. Now, these are all $5 each, but if you buy the set, then it's $13 with free shipping in the US and calculated shipping anywhere else. So if you want to get your hands on those stickers, be sure to send me a message either here or on Instagram, and we'll get those shipped out to you. If you follow me on Instagram, then you've recently heard that I've teamed up with Hobby Hotspots brushes. So not only are they giving me a new set of brushes, but they're also giving a new set of brushes away to the winner of my 1,000 follower giveaway. And they've given me a promo code to give to all of my followers and subscribers. So if you want to grab some new brushes and you use the code below, it'll give you 10% off, free shipping on orders over $25, and a portion of that sale will come back to the channel. So without further ado, let's get things started. All right, so just like any project, we want to go ahead and get our model nice and primed up. So I use Rust-Oleum 2-in-1 paint and primer, but you can use any black primer that you like, so long as you just get a nice coverage on the model. Now, there's something that I need you to pay attention to while we're painting this model. There are two parts of Necrons that need separate attention. One is all of the, I don't know what you call it, like the skeleton, I guess, of the model. I mean, they are skeletons, but what I'm talking about is the pieces that are underneath the armor. So if, for instance, if you look at the leg, you have armor here and running right here, but right here, this is the skeleton of the Necron. So that's going to be painted differently than the armor. And the same thing goes for the shoulders, for instance. We have armor, armor, armor on the chest, and then this right here, the spine, that's part of the skeleton. So we're going to be painting those differently and in different order. So the very first thing that we're going to do is actually paint the armor. So to do that, you can either paint this color on or you can dry brush it. I like to dry brush because it leaves some of the recesses nice and black, so it's kind of gives a natural shadow to it, and also it helps you get through a bunch of models much faster. So if you're speed painting or you're batch painting, you can get through this thing and not spend all day on it. So to do this, I'm going to use the Hobby Hotspots small premium dry brush and some of this Rune Lord brass. So we just want to take this, load up our brush, and what I like to do is keep some paper towel here and just get as much of the paint off as you can. So we want so little paint on our brush that it barely transfers over. And what we want to do is just try to hit any pieces of armor and try to avoid the skeleton bits that are underneath. Now, if you get any of this paint onto the skeleton, don't worry about it, because we're going to go over those areas a little later anyway, and we can clean everything up. Now, that seriously took no time at all. So what we next want to do is get a fine tip brush, and with the Rune Lord brass on there, we just want to go over any areas that we don't want to look too weathered. So for instance, this part of the leg right here, I just want this to be a little more solid, and same with the face. But I do not want to go over any areas of the face, like right here near the cheeks, or this part of the head, that naturally have those shadows in there from the dry brushing. Here's another part right here on the arm where the dry brushing just missed it a little, so we're just going to go over it and just fill in any areas where we can really just see too much of the undercoat. This is also great to do for the hands because the hands are small, so dry brushing those areas kind of just goes everywhere. So if you want to go ahead and just take that Rune Lord brass and go over those areas too. Now all of the Rune Lord brass should be complete, and we can now move on to painting the skeleton. So the very first thing that you want to do is make sure that all of the skeleton bits are painted in Abaddon black or still have that black primer on there. So if any of the Rune Lord brass spilled over onto the skeleton, be sure to go back and touch up any of those spots. Now with all of those areas painted in black, we can next move in and start painting the skeleton silver. So what I like to use is a nice bright silver, so I use Ironbreaker by Citadel. And what you want to do is just get a good coverage, about 2 layers, on all of the skeletal pieces. Now all of our silver is complete, and we can now give it a good wash. So what I like to use for this is Black Templar contrast paint. So I go ahead and throw it down on some tinfoil because I don't want this on my wet palette. And I just water it down a little bit because it is very concentrated. Remove some from your brush and just go over all the silver areas with this. Now I tried to just use Nolan oil for this, but it doesn't darken the silver. It gets into the recesses and it dulls it a little bit, but it doesn't do what the Black Templar contrast does. So if you have some, definitely use it. If you don't, I suggest you pick some up. Now that all the silver is washed, we can now wash all of the armor. So what I like to use is this Cryptek Armor Shade Gloss. And just like the contrast, we want to just throw this down on some tinfoil or a palette or whatever you have sitting around and just water it down a little bit. It's very concentrated. And then we want to just wash any of the armor and try not to get it into the silver. Okay, so we are totally done washing now, and all the colors are really starting to pop. The brass is nice and rich, and the silver, although it's not popping, it's not really bright. The color went down a little bit, but it's got like this blue tint to it, so it looks really nice. And what we can do now is go back with the original colors, so the Rune Lord brass and the Ironbreaker silver, and we can go ahead and edge highlight anything or lighten up the shoulder pads. So what I'm going to do is definitely use some Rune Lord brass and go over these areas right here where the light catches. And for instance, on the head right here, I'm going to take some of that Ironbreaker silver and just touch it up a little bit just to really make it shine. Next, we're going to edge highlight the weapon with some Fenrisian Gray. So just get a nice fine tip brush and go at it. Okay, so our edge highlighting is about done, and before you put away that fine detail brush, what we want to do is we want to go over a bunch of different spots with white, because we're then going to go over it with Tesseract Glow and make it green and make it look like it's glowing. So the areas that we want to go over are the eyes, the symbol on the chest, these little dots on the gun, in between the coils here, this tube right here, and the tube in the chest. And I believe, yep, that should be everywhere. Now you can do this one of 2 ways. You can either use your brightest white, which for me is White Scar, or you can use a gray, so for instance like Celestra Gray, and work your way up and then highlight with White Scar. And that highlight will be brighter than the Celestra Gray. So you can really put as much effort as you want into it. And I'm gonna do a mix of the two. For instance, the eyes are just gonna be White Scar because they're so tiny and I want them to glow as bright as they can. And then for the tubes, I'll most likely use a gray and then work my way up to White Scar. And then one more thing that you can do is here on the gun, you can dry brush a little bit of that gray or white around these little circles and you can make it look as though it's glowing. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. Okay, I'm just gonna add a little bit of White Scar to my brush and then nice and carefully just go into those eyes and apply just a tiny bit. All right, so now most of the areas that we wanted to be white are in fact white. And to do the weapon, I have a trick. So I want to dry brush it, but I don't want to overpower the area because it's such a small little area that we're working with. So what I like to do is just get an old beat up brush, and you most likely have an old one sitting around somewhere. It's got a decently firm tip to it. And then what you want to do is just get some of your white paint and dry brush just with that old crusty brush that you've got. So as you see, when I'm dry brushing with this, I'm only working with that tiny little area rather than a dry brush. So if we look at this one, where the spread is much bigger. So getting most of the paint off, we're just gonna go around these little dots right here and just dry brush some of that white on. And this will give a nice glow effect to the weapon. There we go. Now that took no time, and we have a nice glow around the weapon. Now you can do one of two things here. You can either fill in all these little lines, like that pattern around the dots, or you can leave it black. What I like to do is fill it all in to look like the weapon is charging and it's about to fire. Or if you just keep it subtle, it could look like he's just moving and not yet firing. So what I'm going to do is get some white scar, and I'm going to water it down. When I say water it down, I mean really water it down. There we go. And then what we're gonna do, starting from this dot right here, is just let it kind of pool in there and just move the paint around, getting in all the nooks and crannies. Now, as this dries, it will shrink a little bit, so you might have to do this twice, but by the end of it, the coverage is very nice. Okay, so let's talk real quick before we move on to the next step. So what we need to do next is we need to add in the green glowing effect. And what I like to use is Tesseract Glow. But as you see down here, it starts to clump up over time. So as you see with this booger stick that I have, I kind of just stuck it in there and mixed it all around, and it still has parts that are real clumped up. So you want to make sure that this is thoroughly mixed, because when it separates, it starts to look more yellow than it does green, and that'll make your glow obviously look yellow, and that's not what we're going for. We're going for a bright green glow. So go ahead, and if you need to, just take that stick. I wish I would have shown you what it looked like before I started mixing it, but just get on in there and pick up all that sludge that's at the bottom. And once you start to really move it around and you give it a couple shakes, it should be just fine. And that's the good thing about this paint, at least that I've noticed, is compared to the other ones, you can really bring it back to life if you just stir it up real good. So keep mixing this up, keep shaking it up, and once you get it all pretty bright and green, you should be all set to go. All right, now I have my Tesseract Glow all mixed, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some of this, and just like the washes that we did, I'm gonna put it right here on some tin foil, and I'm gonna add water to it, because this stuff is great for covering a surface, but since it is so concentrated, it sort of just overpowers the surface, and it can sort of leave like little streaky marks, and we don't want that. We don't want to add any extra texture to what we're working with. So go ahead and just water it down, and get some of it off your brush, because we don't want to put too much down at a time, and just do layers, just like a regular paint. Just do layers to this, take your time. I usually do around 2 to 3, depending on how dark I want the glow to be. But just like a regular paint, do some layers, take your time, and the result will be much better. Okay, so I'm gonna add a little extra Tesseract Glow right here. And you see how it starts to pool? It becomes very dark. It would sort of be like that over this entire area if I didn't thin it down. Now the key here to get that glow effect is thin your Tesseract Glow even more so it's very, very watery and transparent, and then just lightly go over some of the areas that you dry brushed. Now the last thing that we can do to really make this thing pop is get some white paint. So I'm going to be using some Corax white for this one. Water it down and just go over these little dots and just sort of glaze it on there. We don't want to go too heavy with it, because if we do, it'll show the layer between the white paint and the green, and that'll add a little bit of texture. And right now we have a nice smooth glow, so we don't want to ruin that. Okay, now the Necron Warrior is complete. Go ahead and base this to match your army, and you're all set. I'd love to give a massive shout out to my patrons Leandrist, Che Phillip, CK, and The Dark Path. Thank you all so very much for your support, and I really hope you like those new patron stickers that I've sent you in the mail. Now, if you'd like to help support the channel, I'll drop a link to my Patreon below, and if you just want to hang out and talk about the hobby, I'll drop a link to my Discord down below too. Now let's check out this week's viewer submissions. Now this submission is by CCrazy420, and these are the finished water bases from the ones that I showed last week. So if you saw my video last week, you would have seen these bases half completed, and now they are finally done. Now, I've never had any luck with water effects. You know that I hate woodland scenics, and although this isn't woodland scenics, just any type of water effect that isn't just your basic 2-part epoxy is just a no-go for me. But I love what you've got going on right here. I'm so happy that you don't have to deal with a bunch of shrinkage or any type of discoloration, and it seems like just an easy way to make water. I'm totally down to give this a shot myself because it looks great, and I can't wait to see all of the bases when this is totally complete. Now be sure to share any of your work with me both on Instagram and Facebook at The Dry Paint Pot, because I pick my favorites each week and I feature them in my upcoming videos. Now wash your brushes, clean your paint pots, and keep on painting.